Hi there and welcome to Ignite. Today we are talking about the First Nations Transition Program and how central teaching is to that program. I'm Sheila McManus. I'm one of the Board of Governors teaching chairs with the Teaching Centre at U of L. And here with me today to talk about the program is Andrea Glover from the library, Michelle Hogue, who is coordinator of the First Nations Transition Program, and Dan Johnson from Geography and Environmental Sciences. So thanks for coming this morning.
Thank you.
So let's start with Michelle as coordinator of the program. Tell us about the program. What is the First Nations Transition Program?
The First Nations Transition Program is a bridging program. Essentially, it started out about 10 years ago to provide an avenue for First Nations students who are otherwise inadmissible to the university, a way into the university, to provide foundational courses that would get them sort of to a place where they could then transition into mainstream university programs. So as such, it is still that, but it's more than that in the sense that it also works in a cohort model. And so our students come in as a cohort, and they're together for an entire year, and they go through a program of prescribed courses, some of them foundational to where they need to go. So things like mathematics, library science, computer skills and such. And then they transition after that into mainstream. We've been trying to sort of expand that a little bit differently and have them come back as mentors later on for our new and incoming students. So we're hoping to grow that program some.
Great. So maybe just in turn, tell me how long have each of you been teaching in the program, the kinds of courses that you teach in the program, and how, or maybe if, you've had to really rethink your teaching for those courses. And I'll just start with Andrea.
I think now it's my 11th year in the program. So I've had a good decade to make many, many mistakes and to fix them. And it's been just a great learning experience. So when I first started, I had some experience teaching Management 3090, which was for the Aboriginal business program in the Faculty of Management. So I had a little bit of an idea of teaching Aboriginal peoples, but nothing prepared me quite for the First Nation Transition Program.
Why is that?
It's just a gas. It's just very kinetic, and things can change on a dime, and it's been one where you just have to keep adapting and evolving your teaching and being very flexible about what you do. So it's been good for me.
And you teach the library?
Library Science 0500, which is a required course. You cannot get away. You cannot run, you cannot hide. You will be in library science, which is great because that is one of the things that the University of Lethbridge Library has been hoping for years. Since we actually first started talking about information literacy in our place of work, and how great it would be to have a full credit course. And the First Nation Transition Program was very forward thinking. Yes.
So Michelle, how long have you been teaching in the program, and what kinds of classes do you teach?
Well, I've been in the program, I think, 9 or 10 years by now. I started out just teaching chemistry, so I was sort of brought in to teach chemistry. And then as it evolved, I became the coordinator. And so within the program, I teach chemistry. I teach a course called Bridging Cultures, Two-Eyed Seeing. And outside of the program, but within NAS, I teach a different research course. So I sort of move in and out of the transition program as well.
Dan?
I began in 2005. Other than my sabbatical year off, I think I've taught every year. Enjoyed it immensely. It's fantastic. The topic I teach, I think, fits well with what they need to know from now on. And in fact, there's a program on it as well. So some of them end up in it. So I'm delighted to be in it.
So, and what course is that?
Environmental science. So I get to teach them history of the earth, ecology, biodiversity, evolution, pollution, energy sources, everything. It's a lot of fun.
Fracking.
It comes up.
You don't teach them how to do that.
So through these courses, you alluded to it briefly, but have you had to rethink your teaching? Do you find that you teach differently in the FNTP courses versus courses you teach elsewhere around the university?
I think I have taught differently. There are also learning facilitators that come with this gig. So we have two of them. One is for health sciences and one is for
Just the transition
just
program
the
in general.
transition program in general. So that person has always been an FNMI person. So they have a great cultural look into the world. So they're there as not like a teaching assistant or advisory, but they're just to really help you with the cultural part. And so I did stuff because we teach what we know. And I taught a lot of things just like I did in library science. And the learning facilitators were very gentle with their suggestions, but they said, you know, you might want to try less paper and more of an oral approach, more oral history components, and maybe get rid of some of that other stuff. And so I said, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. And so I found that people listened far better and were able to capture what I was saying. And in fact, became like a Hansard. They could say, well, you said this on that date. And I'm just, oh, wow. Oh, and that was kind of scary for me because, you know, you think you have your moments and your soliloquies in class.
Yeah.
And you're doing very well, and then sometimes you dip off the end. And,
Yeah.
and so I changed that. I cut the paper in half, which was hard for a librarian of my age, and, you know, went to some more oral interaction.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound right, but okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know for you, Michelle, you've really quite fundamentally rethought how to teach chemistry. I don't know if it's as a result of being part of the FNTP, but talk more about that.
Specifically, yeah, it is as a result of being in the FNTP. I'll just tell you a little story. I remember the very first time I taught the chemistry class, and I was teaching from the outside coming in, and I taught like I had always taught. And so in chemistry, when we first get into the lab, we have a glassware check-in and a list of things that they have to check off and whatnot. And I had a really unique group that particular year. That was my first year. And so I stepped out of the room for a second. I had given them their glassware kits and their check-in sheet and left and came back, and nobody was doing anything. And they were all whispering to each other. And I thought, like, what's... So I asked the question, so what's the problem? They said, we have no idea what this is or what this is, so a flask or a beaker. And I said, well, you've never seen them before? No, and we have no idea what these words mean. So we made a game out of it, or we changed how we did it, so to speak. So they gave it a Blackfoot name, and I told them what it was in terms of the chemistry terminology, and I told them how to name it, label it, and all those kinds of things. And so then it came time a week later, because we always do a lab exam, and so they got the list again, and they had to pass the quiz based on that list, and they gave me a list in Blackfoot. And it's the only time I will ever brag about getting 0% on a test. But I got 0% and then some. I think I got minus 30. But what I didn't get was then I tried to say those words later on, and you have to know the culture. They're so fun-loving. And the names they gave it were things like, oh my God, when I would try and say them, it would be like, you know, ladies' frumpy butt or something like that, you know? And then they'd all start laughing, and I would say, so what are you laughing at? And so they'd say, do you know what you just said? And I would say, beaker in Blackfoot. Oh no, that is not what you said. So from there, you know, I thought, oh, this is interesting, you know, there's not only just a cultural difference, there's a vocabulary difference. There's a way of doing things, and if you know Aboriginal ways of knowing and learning, it's a hands-on first, as Andrea said, oral culture. And so to put it into a context that they don't have any context and relevancy in their life is really a big jump. And so for me, it made me rethink not only terminology, but how I teach. And so when I teach chemistry now, and I've essentially blown up how I teach it in the sense that it's hands-on first, and we always begin with the practical. Every single class is practical, whether it's a lecture or whether it's a lab, and then we bring the theory in later on. And it works. And the medicine wheel becomes the template for sort of what I do. And it works well so far.
So far,
Yeah. But that's after many years of trying to teach in the way that we've been traditionally taught to teach, in the way that we've been educated. And even though I am of the heritage, I was still Western educated. And so, you know, as you were saying today, you know, very chronological, starting to end, and very logical ways of doing things, which does not work. It's a linear, the Western system is a linear progression from start to finish, and there's no chance for sort of revisiting, because if we do that, we call it failure. But in the Aboriginal paradigm, we don't call it that. We call that continuous learning, and each time around, you're building on that knowledge. So you're not failing. You're just learning more. Sometimes we need more than one time around. Sometimes we need 20 times around. If you look at your mistakes in life and, you know, you end up where you are, you kind of go, geez, you know, how did I do that again, you know? So it's the same philosophy.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So.
Dan?
Well, I don't know where to begin. I love my topic so much, and I love teaching it to the students. And I've learned a lot from them that feeds back to improve my upper year courses too. Because I often begin and say, well, you know, let's all agree, you know, science is not the only way of knowing things, but it's a good way. And if you learn how and get good at it, you can see where it will be useful and where it won't. And one of the things that's shaken out of that discussion of how old the Earth is and where the heavy elements come from, exploding stars, it's in us, and all these things that seem philosophical, but they're good science, is an appreciation for the real natural world that's there, but more importantly, an appreciation for skeptical thinking. And they are really good at it. They are good at being skeptical, and they suddenly realize this is really a good thing. We're getting rewarded for skeptical thinking. That's fantastic. Try to develop that critical thought and questioning. Where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? You know, not in a rude way, but in a searching way. And searching is something that they all seem to have a really good understanding of it. And it's really, really good. I love it. But we cover all the hard topics: evolution and then sustainable development and modern conflicts, environmental justice, all these issues in one class. So I really like it. And if anything, I've been the big benefactor in all this.
I think that's a really important point. One of the things that Dan said is, you know, they question. I teach this Bridging Cultures course as well, and the discussions we get into are absolutely amazing, and I don't have these in my other classes. And it doesn't matter if they're, you know, what level they're at. The questions they ask and the amount of discussion that goes into the class is amazing, and I come away going, gee, you know, that's really good. I wish I would have thought that one through. But you know, you learn so much, and they ask a lot of really important questions in terms of bridging. You know,
It's something that I find really interesting about the program is that it's not about content. You aren't delivering a different kind of content. What's interesting for me about the program is that teaching differently is what's really central to this. Could you comment on that? I've already asked you a bit about, you know, how have you had to think about your own teaching, but can you talk a bit about how it's been rethinking teaching, how we teach the First Nations, Métis, and Indigenous students who come in? Far more so than the FNTP program is not about content that's being taught. And I'll start this time with Dan.
You know, it's funny. In my mind, I do see some things that I do differently in that class, but they're not really about culture and race and history. They're about more practical matters. People have to drive a long way. Some of them have kids now because they're, you know, they've taken a long break. Some of them have other complications in their lives and issues, and all the funerals and things like that, I suppose, are cultural. But there are things, and not really allowances, but different ways to do things. And a lot of those just have to do with the harsh realities of life now for each person. And of course, every student has that, and teaching's all about respect for that. But you don't respect it just by saying, oh, I know there are problems out there, I'll teach so that anyone could relate. I think you need to find out and investigate, you know, and I really rely on people like Michelle and Andrea and Nadine and other people to tell me, you know, if somebody has a special situation that week or whatever. And so I do take that into account. But on the other hand, getting back to my course topic I mentioned before, getting them to, now this sounds crazy, but they're very respectful students and interested students, and I love that. All students are pretty well, but some are shyer, I guess. But I have to get over that a bit and say, be a little bit disrespectful of me if you feel that if that's what being skeptical is. Mm-hmm. If I say something and you're skeptical, that's a good thing. You're onto something. And then, but only if you change your mind when you see the reality of it, or if it's right or wrong, and we mm-hmm. decide together. So I guess one challenge I've had is getting them to really express their own skepticism and mm-hmm. and background and knowledge, because mm-hmm. everybody brings something that nobody else knows to every mm-hmm. class.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing I try to instill on them. Everyone here knows things that no one else knows. And I also know some you don't know. Mm-hmm. But I'm at the front. So I'm going to try to share mine, and we'll all work together. So that's what I do.
Yeah. What do you think, Michelle, as sort of you're the person who kind of oversees the program. Mm-hmm. How is it that teaching differently has become so central to it, and how do you maintain that innovative teaching focus in a program which could be distracted by, well, this is about different content or, whatever?
Well, as you said earlier, it's not about different content, because at the end of the day, we still have to, our students, when they leave this program, still have to be at the starting gate of the next class. Mm-hmm. And if we have failed to do that within the program, then we're not doing our job, and we're doing a disservice to the students themselves. So we do have to do it. But a long time ago, somebody told me, one of my former professors, every student is unique, and every student deserves individual attention. So when we're at this institution or any institution that's really, really large, we don't have the opportunity to do that. So if you're teaching a class of 160 students, you don't get to know those students, right? We have an opportunity within the transition program to have some one-on-one individual attention. And what it does, and Dan touched on it, is that it challenges your teaching, because each student is different, each situation is unique, and so then when you get to the table, how do you attend to each unique situation, each unique student, but at the same time make it equitable for everybody across the board, and then get them all to the same starting gate. So it really challenges your teaching, and it really challenges you as an individual, because you, as Dan said, when they question you, you have to bring your best self forward every time. And sometimes that doesn't work. I mean, and it's like, whoa, okay, yep, wonder about that one. But it's good because they engage at a different level, and it's not that students within this institution don't engage, they do. We just have a unique cohort environment. And I think when we look at some of the new initiatives that are going on within this institution, such as the first year experience programs, we're going to see the same kind of thing. Because you get to work with a group of students as a cohort, and you get to have that personal connection. And it's like, teaching your children. I mean, they're going to call into question anything you do, so come with your bag packed.
Can you give me some specific examples, though? And I'm going to start with you, because you've touched on this a little bit already. What kinds of specific things do you do differently, whether it's assignments? What specific changes have you made in your teaching, in your classrooms, when you're with your FNTP students?
Well, one thing I do more so is teaching by teasing. It's very odd to anyone who might be observing it. Quite often people say, do you talk like that? There's this teasing. But that is how particularly the Blackfoot people do learn, and it's this whole teasing thing. So there's a lot of back and forth that someone who's walking in might say, oh, that's very sarcastic. But it works really well, and I find that in my other course, unless they've know me or know of me, the first while they're just like, are you serious? You're so sarcastic. So I find that I have a lot of free rein to do that, and also the whole thing about using, as you can see, I can't tie my hands down, but that's another really great thing about Indigenous cultures. There's a lot of sign language, so I'm freer to do stuff. Whereas when I'm in other classes, I try to stop that a little bit.
Right.
So there's that. And the other thing is I do teach, and I do think in a circle I always have. I'm not a linear person. And there are people in librarianship who are very fact-based, and then there are people who are the reference librarians who are the public and teaching. And I find that when I talk in a circle, the FNTP students know it, know where I'm going, and they're not as impatient for me to get to that thing. Where in my other classes, it's okay, A equals B equals C. And sometimes in FNTP, I can say B equals D equals Z, and back to A and D. And there's not this, oh, we can't follow. So again, a much more, less paper, more, I call it invasive teaching, which is also a very scary term. But I do get into their area. So my philosophy has always been you have to make them comfortable to make them uncomfortable. So we can get to the harder things like censorship and so forth. And Dan mentioned something that to me, it's on my course outline, everyone is ignorant only on different subjects. So I can sit here with a historian, a chemist,
Whatever I am.
whatever
Dan is.
a geographer, environmental science, / whatever.
They actually like when they find out I'm really an entomologist because
Yes.
everybody was a kid once.
/ entomologist. And I can sit here and I don't have this, please don't ask me any history questions. Because I know my stuff and I'm always willing, to learn. And that's another thing is the challenging part is really good. When we talk about the collection, for instance, and why do we have so many books about Aboriginal peoples written by non-natives? That often comes up, and then we have a little discussion about that, or we might have a discussion about why do we call people Indians of North America instead of First Nations? I find we can have better, more informed discussions where people are more willing to really put it out there on the line, whereas in the other classes I've been in, people are just a little bit, no, we just don't want to talk about race, or it's a little scary in second year, so let's hold back on that. So it's been a really great way to, to teach. So hands, talking, fun.
Yeah.
And we can have lots of fun and pull pranks is another thing I like to do. All in the, quest for great scholarship and stuff.
Less paper, start with the practical, then the theory. All right. So what about you, Dan? These two have already covered a lot of the concrete and less concrete ways that an FNTP classroom is different. Can you give me some specific ways or?
There's one strange thing that I found.
I can never
Just
wait.
one?
Well, I didn't say only one.
Stranger than Henry's ways? Oh.
One that comes to mind just now, actually. I wouldn't have thought that I'd be doing this, but I do, at one point, sort of hearken back to traditional knowledge in an unusual way. Because my class is about the whole biosphere, and hundreds of millions of years, and drifting continents and dinosaurs right up to oil and gas industry now. I mean, the whole bit, ecology and so on. I point out from time to time with little snippets that, traditional knowledge is really important, but there's traditional knowledge everywhere in the world, right? So let's talk about the Laplanders. Let's talk about the Ghanaians. Let's talk about their traditional knowledge, because that's very useful and cool stuff as well. So you start to take a global perspective without ever really saying the word global.
Right.
And eventually that really pays off. People start to see it not only as broader respect, but a gold mine of information that goes back into the past, not just here, but this is important because it's here, but the whole world. So I kind of try to tie the traditions and the science that way. And plus they end up buying geology and evolution and all that as we go. So it's a big win, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important point, though, because in the bridging cultures course that I teach, they want to know about all the other Indigenous groups around the world, and so that's fun because we can explore the similarities and the differences and the continuities and the disparities if we want. And because so often you hear about, native and non-native or Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal. So we've got this polarity that goes on. And it isn't that at all. It's about what do we each bring to the table? So whether it's Aboriginal ways of knowing and learning, or whether it's, Pakistani ways of knowing and learning, or German ways of knowing and learning, we all come to the table with a sort of a skill set, and then how can we share that? And so they're very interested in Indigenous cultures around the world. And so in that particular course, I bring in various professors from around the institution to talk about the work that they do, because they really, really like to know that their Indigenous community here is actually paralleled in other places as well. And it's not polarized.
You just said something that I think is really important about bringing in other people. And the one thing I noticed is they like you to talk about your family. So
Yes.
family extended. And they also will tell me, I've been told, we just don't want to learn about Blackfoot. Because when I first started, and I'm feel free to confess this, I thought everybody was Blackfoot and they lived on the reserve. And so I had people who were Inuit, who were Cree, Métis, and quite a few of them lived in town. So I made these assumptions, and they're very quick to correct you about that. And as one student told me, usually Blackfoot people only tell you things once. But they're very interested in your family, so you may not feel comfortable talking about, my husband's partner spouse in another class, or my son, because quite often people say, we're here for the content, or they're not as welcoming of that. But in here, they really want to know you as a person, so what you're representing. And so they'll say, no, can you cut down that content? And and I'll ask, do you want more Aboriginal examples, or do you want me to talk about Indigenous research and the support that I can give? Not that I do it, but I certainly can find articles and things for that. And so it's a family model. The other thing is when we have, I think, visiting hours, office hours, those tend to go a little bit longer, because there is a sort of a visiting aspect to when you're dealing with someone. And students like to share quite a bit. And so sometimes some of my colleagues aren't quite sure what's going on, but there is, again, that circle to getting to the nub of what's going on. So I've changed that too.
I think that's really important, though. I think the one thing maybe that I find different in the classes that we teach versus the classes that it's about relationship building. And, that is so important, because if you don't have that relationship, you don't have that trust. And I think that we find if we don't have that, our students will often sort of back up and leave or disappear. But we've been very fortunate, at least in the last number of years, in the work that we do, and many of us have been teaching now in the program for a while, so we have a sense of what's needed or how we're going to work together. And we have the most amazing instructors within the program. But it's about relationship, and it's about us having a relationship as well as our relationship with our students. And so
really
we
key.
have to, it's kind of like parents, if parents aren't on the same page, kids take advantage of that.
Yes, they do.
But for us as well, and it's not, we often think of our students as our kids, Sometimes we spend more time with them than we do with our kids, But at the same time, it is about relationships, and it's about our relationship together and our relationship with them, and we have to work on that. And there's a level of expectation that, as Andrea said, in other classes, you don't have that. They don't want to know that, and you don't actually want to share it sometimes either.
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting theme that's developed here about you've got more space to be a whole person, it sounds like, when you're teaching this program, because they expect you to show up as a whole person with the family, with other relationships. But I want to go back around to take that relationship thought and the being a whole person and being embodied in the classroom, but there is still the fact that, so for example, you're coming in as a non-native instructor with Indigenous students. You're coming in as an Indigenous instructor with Indigenous students. You yourself are not Blackfoot, no, but as you say, you're at least
Métis,
from, like that world of theirs, in a way that you two are not. How has that had to shape your teaching, whether it's having to perhaps work a little bit harder to gain some of the trust? Or what are some of the challenges or perhaps opportunities that you think you've had as clearly non-Indigenous instructors in this program? And then I'll move to Michelle next and look at it from the other side.
Can you ask Dan so I can crib from his
Okay,
notes?
Dan can go first.
Well, you know, there's a couple of things I guess I do. I don't really tease. So Andrea's good at it, and she's and better at a lot of things than I am. But I don't really do that.
I thought you said I don't
But
really teach. I just realized you said I don't really teach. You don't really teach. Like, what are you doing there, Dan?
What are you doing?
No, I don't tease.
Why are we
He
paying
doesn't
you?
tease.
You mentioned teasing and sarcasm might be the interpretation. That's fantastic, and I do something like that a bit, I guess. I try to find common ground through humor, and sometimes even humorous logic. You know, like where's the logic in what's being done, you know, in the world with ecosystems and biodiversity and all that. And then that bridges to the concept that we all have, and that's a sense of natural justice. So even though we're studying environment and science, it really feeds into a sense of environmental justice. And they do relate to that extremely well. And the humor too. Not that I'm a great humorist, but they really have things to teach me in that regard. It's great. Everybody does. But humor and justice, non-science topics, but they promote science learning. So I try to find those little things. Plus, like you mentioned, family. It's really funny. That goes back more than just your current family too, because one day I started talking about something, and they wanted to know, well, what is my distant family background? And I said, well, Scandinavian mostly. And then we started talking about Lansa Meadow, the Leif Erikson community that was established in Newfoundland, and I actually said I've actually been there and told them about it, and we started talking about Greenland and ice caps and climate change, and then people moving around and how you would make nails from bog moss and all these things that were not only ecologically oriented but cultural and so on. So tying history. So that's my third thing. So I guess they're non-science issues, but a little bit of humor, a little bit of history, and a little bit of justice tied together. So,
And I'm going to pick up on justice because I think that's the two things I've always said. Humor, so very important. Humility, even though we go around saying how great we are, but we know we're not. We just have a good time and stuff. But once they get to know you, they realize that there are two themes. I've always thought that pain knows no culture. There's no difference. Injustice knows nothing. So if you yourself, I feel like I've had that tragedy and injustice has touched my personal life, which has been, parts of it have been public. And so that's something that I can sort of identify on a very minuscule part. So they realize that I'm flawed and I'm open about being flawed, and the humor is something that really just can save the day. And so quite often when it's very dark and you know the stories, and it's amazing to me sometimes how people can keep showing up. And you see that throughout some very dark periods, that people can still find this resilient humor, the dark gallows humor, and come back for something like that. So that's one thing I think that they appreciate, just that you have been that way. Now the other part, and I just thought of this, just as I was sitting here with you.
Wow.
Is that I don't have any political pressure because I'm not Aboriginal. So I don't have any, I don't have any attachment to a tribe or a region or an area, so I can say things. And I'm going to be, very frank. I can say things and they'll say, oh, that's okay because you're white. You don't know any better. You're white. And I'll say, okay, well, so it gives you a grace period to make those mistakes. For a long time, people thought I was Métis, which was interesting. And I said, well, I could have, worked that if I had known that you thought that. Like, I really could have. And I was just kind of shocked. And then the accompanying comment to that was, we thought that's why you cared so much. And I was kind of heartbroken about that because I thought, just because of the hue of my skin and my lineage, which is Scottish and Czechoslovakian, I can't appreciate you and put my 100% in here.
Yeah.
So it's sort of
Yeah.
we talked about that, and we do talk about reverse racism. And they will say things like, well, you don't know because you haven't been there. And I'm like, I haven't. But I've got some other, because we all carry our own pain and stuff, but I've got a little pocket of troubles over here. Let me tell you about that. Let me tell you what my husband didn't do last week. Let me tell you what my son did. So, you relate to that. So that part of it is a bit of a challenge. And they're very clear about saying, well, you don't know this. You might not know this, but now if you make mistakes, very gentle corrections, or else they'll let you go and do the same mistake. My case in point is how I had been saying for about 7 years in the class, oh, nah-ha. And I'm sure when people watch this, they'll all laugh, but it is one of the worst swear words you can say. But when I was growing up, we would tease each other as children and say, like, nah-ha, I got this, nah-ha. And when I said it in class, they were just like, oh. And I went, oh, I'm making an impact. I love those moments when I think I'm really doing something spectacular.
And all you knew was like the worst, dirtiest black
yeah. And so finally some mature...
Pedagogical tip, make sure never swear in a foreign language.
Don't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And some mature female student said, do you know what you're saying? And I said, well, I'm saying this. And I said it again. They were, oh, I said, okay, now what's going on? So they explained it to me. And I said, why did they let me go for this long? Because they can. And it's sporting. So there's a lot of sporting type of activities. And so I never know really when I'm being made, I don't think I'm being made fun of, but they certainly laugh at me, with me, behind me, at the side of me. And if you're willing to be the butt of jokes, it's okay.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then there's, times when I have been, told certain things. So, I don't really talk to, you're the first, okay, let's talk about stereotypes. One, I'm a librarian. So people's expectations of what librarians
We all
are.
start to giggle.
Look at you, all laughing. But it's true. There's this stereotype of librarians, and quite often in some of the schools, particularly, residential schools and so forth, their first contact, that's a pun, with librarians has not been good, as it has been for a lot of people. So they're coming in with an image, and it's very hard for them, you have to work about that. So there's the fact that I'm non-native, I'm a librarian. Tall is okay. Tall's good. Female, that doesn't matter. But those are the things that I've had to really work on.
Right. So there's both obvious challenges and the occasional opportunity of being a non-native instructor in a white class.
Good,
Dan, would you agree with that?
Yeah, although I have to admit, I don't know what they think of me, to tell the truth.
Why don't you ask?
I'm just so focused on the topic, and
You just love the science so much.
I guess I do, but I'm also kind of a little bit self-deprecating, I guess, in my approach. If I want to make humor and I'm testing the waters, I do it on myself, of course. We all do that. And I rarely am in a situation that would cause me to venture more into cultural questions and all that. In a way, that's my good luck, my advantage. But I just try to stay aware and cognizant of anything that could come up and do what I can do. But until then, I just pour it on regarding how to think critically and the history of science and how they've come to believe certain things, and try to make them see that no one's telling you it has to be. They're just kind of trying to show you what it probably is, and thinking that way. So, and that's kind of I don't know if that's really a non-native way of thinking or not. You see, that's the problem. I don't want to assume what they think or what they know or anything else, and they don't know either. Let's face it, they were born and they grew up and they're in their 20s or 30s and they know what they've been told, and I'm the same. If you really looked into the native different views and the huge diversity of ways of thinking, there are probably people that align quite well with what I teach, and others who don't. So I don't make any assumptions,
Right.
and I take it at face value.
Yeah.
And the other thing I think that you've done, Rebecca has done, everyone who's in the program has done, is they've done their own research into First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, because we've had to. So we're in a learning curve too.
Yeah, it's true.
And,
Interested, very interested all the time.
And we're very
Yeah.
interested, and that kind of real, authentic interest in the people and the culture, the students pick up on that right away.
And care.
And
and we
care.
do
We
care.
do care.
And we do care. And although I say, well, everybody's the same, we're talking about a big globe
Yeah.
here, that's not my personal view. Some people deserve more consideration.
Yeah.
It's a fact. And particularly because of how things have gone for them historically or even currently. So I try to adapt to that.
The FNTP program is brilliant at supporting FNMI students when they come to the university and helping them take those first steps towards the rest of the U of L. But they leave you eventually, right? So something you and I have talked about in the past, instructors who are not part of the brilliant FNTP program, but who would still like to be doing more, doing better for the FNMI students who arrive in our classes. Many of us see few or no Indigenous students in our classes, but what do you think the rest of us could learn from you about how to teach those students better? What support could we give them when they have to have, I'm sure, the horrible moment of leaving this very supportive, safe FNTP space and then coming into other courses in the rest of the university? What do you think teachers, other teachers at the U of L, could learn from you in terms of how to do better for those FNMI students when they get into the other classes on campus?
Well, I prep them by saying, one day you're going to be in a political science class, because that was my undergrad here. And the topic is going to be colonization or something, or self-governing on reserves. And you are going to be the only First Nation, Métis, or Inuit person in the room. And you're going to find that people will swivel and look at you, or not look at you at all.
Yeah.
And those things are going to happen. And so just from listening to students who have gone through for the next couple of years, they said one thing that instructors don't assume as an instructor, you might think you're doing them a favor by saying, can you tell us about residential schools? You know, don't assume that, and don't put the student on the spot.
Yeah.
And that was probably
It is, in
one
fact,
of the
not
big
their job to speak on behalf of their entire community.
And
Yes.
as well, we might like them to. That's something that where you just sort of have to say no.
Right.
To restrain yourself, because sometimes you can overcompensate. And I know people who have done it with, a totally good heart, but they've gone overboard in doing it. So it's restraint, and yet to be interested in their culture and understand sometimes when they can't get a paper in or something, it's pretty good reason why.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I think opening up the door to invitation. I mean, First Nations students, although they're changing now. Many of our students are changing because we've been coaching them. You got to go introduce yourself.
Shy.
They're very, very shy and won't ask, and they're very intimidated by your stature. I mean, you're the professor. Like Andrea. Sheila, you're out there, and so that kind of personality, not that it's wrong, is sometimes like, okay, so is it approachable or not approachable?
Right.
And so for them, that's a challenge. Am I going to be, and for many of our students, when in their former schooling, if they've approached a professor, the experience hasn't been positive, and or a teacher, and it hasn't been positive, and so. That's an intimidation. So even just a quiet email. I know one of my faculty or friends is Leah Fowler. She just sends a nice quiet email. Welcome to my class.
Yeah, it's very
things
simple.
like that. So just recognizing that you see them. So that opens the door. So if they are having challenges, then they can come and see you, because oftentimes they'll just drop off. And you don't want that. You want to sort of keep that dialogue going. And so trying to have a dialogue, a personal dialogue. And, you know, sometimes it's just as simple as an email or, hey, you know, you didn't do so well on that test. Maybe you could come and see me and we could chat about why. Is it something that I'm doing? Oftentimes, you know, one of the problems that many of our students have, or at least I feel is a problem in terms of science and bridging cultures, is context. I mean, so sometimes when you ask, well, even Andrea was saying about using her lovely word. If you don't know the context of it, if you don't have that context or that vocabulary, it makes learning really, really hard to do. Because you got to find that context, you've got to make that parallel within your own culture, then you've got to make the connection and you've got to bridge that. So sometimes it's just as simple as providing context. And so maybe just, you know, could you tell me a little bit about something in your culture that I could maybe make that relationship for you and help you think in a different kind of way? So it's challenging you to think outside of your box too.
Yeah. Yeah. Dan?
I'll try not to give a long answer, but it's a topic.
Are you saying my answer was too long?
No, I didn't say as long. No, your answer was exactly perfect.
I think in terms of total minutes, you get to have some time now.
But I'm a little bit apprehensive that I can think of a lot of things because I think about this a lot. And I'll break it down a bit here. One is mentorship. Another one is experience, personal experience. And another one is flexibility. Mentorship, if we tell them, come anytime, ask me anytime, I see them 6 months later, a year later, how's it going? That's leaving the door open, but that's not really good enough. I think you kind of have to bug them a little bit. You know, you have to make those. So I try that. I do ask them, come to the lab, come and talk to me. Is it going okay with your classes? I'm not really officially a mentor for you, but is there anything not working? Can we talk about it? How about meeting one of my grad students? They're younger than me. They can talk to you kind of halfway. I've done that. Another thing is experience. I don't know, I don't want to get political, but don't get me started.
So he does want to get political.
He does want to get political.
Yes.
We are getting rich on all the resources, biological, geological, everything else in this country. Isn't there a little money to put the young Native people into positions with companies, with university professors, with colleges, with city governments, and get lots of personal experience to give them a little bootstrap? Why not? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. So I do try to find it, and I know other people do too. Every year I have at least one in my lab, sometimes every day. And you got to find a little bit of, you know, place for them, a seat for them to work, a little bit of pay, you know, get them tied in. And I think that we would be way ahead. And I know you two do it.
Yeah, I do.
But we need to do a lot more. You know, we need to get them involved so that they're there as a person working on a topic that they can have some ownership in, and later they think, I studied that bird, or I studied that chemical, or that water supply, or whatever it is. In my case, that's really important, and we don't have enough of that. We need more personal contact, field trips. I mean, I've thought of changing my class so that I have more field trips, but how do we do that? We don't have a lab time, and the FNTP program is so rich and busy that there are actual conflicts between topics. So how do we get time to go on field trips? We need to do more of that. So we need experience. We need to tie them to projects where they actually are involved. One of my students wants to know all about where the water comes from and how is it defined. How do we define the ways it's distributed, and how do we know about the quality? What's the science there, and what's the history? He says, you know what, when I started studying this topic a little bit on my own, I realized I don't know anything about water at all. And yet I've grown up in that situation where we have reserve issues, city issues, town issues, provincial issues. I don't know anything about it at all. He or she needs to have actual personal experience. So that's it. Then the last thing I mentioned was flexibility. What I do is, it applies to all students, but I think it particularly applies to them. This need for a little bit of flexibility. I often say, and I've actually been criticized for this by previous department chairs, so that's my clue that this is not a standard way to do it. I've said, okay, we're having 12 assignments, and they're small, they're short, they're weekly, and you're going to get graded on your best 10. So 2 of them, whatever. You don't show that day, you get sick, you have a sick kid, whatever. Doesn't matter. You can still get an A if you get 10 out of 12, you know? And that's good for everybody.
Yeah.
And if you're late, now I can't really say that my way should be the normal way, but in my other classes too, I say, look, we're all adults here. If we have something due at a certain time, if you're late, tell me, you give it to me the next day. If you're still late, you have to admit you have a problem, you give it to me the next day. The third day, you get another day. Because there are things where there's absolute drop-dead deadlines in life, and then there's my class, and that's different. So that's the kind of flexibility I like to have in the system, and most people don't need it, but the people that do brings them into the distribution. I teach statistics in the fall as well, so it brings them into the mean.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. But we really mostly we need that personal experience, that contact.
Yeah, I think that's so key.
And I think that's really interesting because you've given us lots of great suggestions for those of us who are not teaching in the FNTP program, but do, of course, we're still going to have some Indigenous students come into our classes. So you've had lots of good ideas about what we could do, little things, not time-consuming things at all, that would help us support those students better. But I find it really interesting that each of you, either directly or indirectly, has suggested that these could also improve our teaching for our non-native students. Could you expand on that a little bit? How do you think the lessons that you've learned teaching in the FNTP program, specifically for FNMI students, could benefit all of the non-native students who make up the majorities here still at U of L, but those non-native students in the quote-unquote regular classes? It's not a trick question because you've all alluded to this already. I'll go back to you. Pick up. Why don't you start the flexibility one, right?
For me, one thing is respect.
Yeah.
And we all respect each other. We all say we do, and we probably do. But we need to show it more.
Okay.
A little bit of hospitality, a little bit more time listening.
Yeah.
Those really go a long way in teaching. It's almost just everyone knows that, but we need to do it more, right?
Yeah.
And that really helps in FNTP. FNTP improved my teaching.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of things in this life do. I mean, riding a motorcycle makes my car driving better. Having kids makes me
Is that true?
listen more to others. It's very true. And teaching in FNTP actually improved my other teaching, so I'm grateful.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic.
I'm
Thanks,
grateful.
Jan.
And I think it makes you think outside the box. And I think that that's really important. We get stuck, right? Because this is how we're taught and this is what we should do.
Especially the academic system.
Absolutely,
Right? Like you wind up with a PhD or an advanced degree and you've really only been trained in one way.
Yeah.
Right? And that brings so many extra challenges to the teaching.
Well, we teach the way we've been taught because,
Exactly.
For many of us, we never had any formal teaching experience, right? So now we have the teaching center, and so you get to do some of this mock teaching and things like that. And if you take the instructional skills workshop and any of those things, but sort of the more I teach, the more I realize I don't know a lot, and that there is lots I can learn.
I knew that all along.
No, but now I'm really becoming concerned about, well, now what about this and what about this?
Yeah.
So it makes you accountable to your teaching, and it makes you accountable to the people that you teach, whether they are First Nation students or whether they are non-First Nation students. It's to the community and to your peers as well.
Yeah.
I don't see, we often hear about this and that or them and non-First Nations, and I don't see the 21st century learner that different than the First Nations learner. When I look at my own children, they learn very much like my First Nations students do. And they're hands-on kinesthetic learners. If they want something, they find the resources, they get it, they bring it, and they come with a whole lot of different ideas. And the worst thing that you can do to any learner, whether they're First Nations or not, is to say, no, that's not the right way of doing it. We've been doing it this way for 450 years, and we're going to keep doing it that way. What you might do is, just like Dan says, that's a really interesting idea. One of the things that I do to pick up on those ideas, to invite them into the conversation, is I do independent and applied studies. Because if they have a question, why don't you explore that in an applied study? Maybe we can get you a little bit of money. If not, well, you got a course credit, and you're answering a question I might have too, and then you can share that. But what about an independent study? And so as soon as you do that, you validate their question. And you validate them for having a question. You're not saying, no, that's the way it's been, we're going to do it. So as soon as you do that, you validate them, and I think that that's really important. Dan does that in his lab all the time. Andrea does that too. She says, oh, that's a question. Well, let's look this one up. And
I don't know the answer.
yeah, so we don't tell them that, right?
Oh, I do sometimes.
Yeah, I do too, yeah. But
I don't know.
I have no clue.
don't
Let me
know.
go find that out for
yeah,
you.
exactly. And to say that you don't know, rather than try and fluff it off like, oh, well, you do know. They see through that, as does any 3-year-old. It's like, yeah, no, you don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. So to sort of make you be honest is really important.
Well, I'd love to tell you a story, but it has a swear in it.
You could use that word,
We
the
could just
Blackfoot
beep it
word.
out.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead and tell your
Okay,
story,
well, I'll
Andrea.
tell a story. I was in class, and I had one of these moments where I was kind of had it out of body, and I was listening to myself, and I said, oh my gosh, I sound so grown up. I'm speaking in paragraph form. It's not just like, sentence, a little blip, blip here and stuff. Oh, this is just wonderful. And then all of a sudden, I didn't know what I was saying. So I just kept talking, and the students were like this, and I said, well, I think I'll quit talking now because I'm just saying bull. I'm just making up now. And I said, I think we can stop there. And so they were gracious about it, and then I said, yeah, they're just when you think you're doing really well, down for the count. And I think too, for the other instructors, which some people might be comfortable with, some people might not quite feel as comfortable with, I find, and I use this term, academically dating. You have students for the semester and you're just like academically dating. Then you break up at the end of the semester and you never see them again, and they don't really talk to you. We did our thing, we're gone now. And I find that this is like a long-term commitment. And so it might be controversial, but I do have a lot of former students on my Facebook. So, and I find...
And they love you.
Well, I love them. And I do, references for jobs and, graduate work. So I'm connected always to that group. And so whether or not you want to share yourself is up to you.
But that's a really important point, because within our own community or culture, I mean, it's like doing research in a different, Jan Newberry talks about this, it's not a one-off. When you're doing research, many researchers, and in science we can do this because we don't have the social requirements. You don't, and I teach this in my Indigenous Research Methodologies course. So much of the research that we do is go and get the data and leave. With First Nations people, it's a commitment. It's the 1,000 cups of coffee. And that's really important. It's a commitment to being there, being present, and you may not see them again, but you may. I have students who come back, and I've seen them 10 years now. I can say that. Oh, it's a long time. But they're, hey, guess what I'm doing? Do you think you could talk to my niece about the transition program, or something like that? So that comes back, and it comes back in spades.
And it's word of mouth, right?
It is, yeah.
It's very powerful.
Yeah.
So if you do something naughty, it goes around. It comes back.
Like use a naughty word for 7 years?
Yes.
Yeah, without
For
finding
naughty
out what
word
it means.
for 7 years,
They had a lot of fun with that.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. This has been a great conversation about the program and about what I think the rest of us can learn from the teaching in the FNTP program. So thanks for coming.
Thanks for
for
inviting
having
us.
us.
It's a pleasure.
It was really a pleasure.